Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Khofana. I'm Khofana Medisa, and today I'm joined by a very special friend of the podcast. We featured in earlier seasons. Biggie, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. You brought us here. We're color coding with our outfits, which
Yeah, I
is
don't know
great.
how that happened, but it worked out really well.
Yeah, so previously when you were here, you were telling us about career pivoting and so on. Would you like to touch on who you are now and the career you decided to traverse?
Wow. Okay. So who I am now, my name is Biggie Tangane. I'm currently at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. I'm actually in transition with my career, so that's why I'm struggling with that answer. So, but I've been with the World Economic Forum for about 2 years now, working on global energy transition policy, working on nature policy and nature finance specifically. And now I'm doing quite a number of things. So I'm doing consulting. I'm back in the country for a few weeks to work on a few things. And I'm actually a farmer. I work here farming. So, there's also that I'm doing. So I'm doing a number of things.
Yeah. I love how we just browse through World Economic Forum. Like, there's so many Botswana who work there. So common. I mean, wow, major moves. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And how has working there kind of widened your mind into, especially thinking about, you talk about energy transition and biodiversity, which is something we're going to be talking about. How has that kind of contributed to you appreciating this idea of preserving nature and our environment?
I wouldn't say it got me to think about preserving nature, but the reason why I went to the World Economic Forum was to really elevate my thinking in terms of policy thinking. I was still at De Beers at the time, and we were working on sustainability and ESG and how we engage the diamond industry to think about climate, to think about people and that sort of thing. But I knew that I wanted to elevate that to really think about how would you address this from a global perspective, right? And not necessarily be confined by a jurisdiction. And I think being there, the projects that I worked on really didn't have silos in terms of industry or jurisdiction. So we worked with partners from all over the world, from all types of industries, and that in itself, you get to really tackle an issue without having those limitations, and that widens your perspective, right? That widens how you view the problem, that widens how you view the solution, that widens how you view the people who can be involved in finding the solution to the problem. So when you talk about biodiversity, it requires a multi-set of stakeholders. You need policymakers, you need financiers, you need project developers, and so forth. You need communities who actually are the ones, the custodians of biodiversity and nature. So that type of thinking, I think, is really helpful. And now when I look at problems to solve, I think beyond just sort of your narrow path of, okay, I need to find a solution to this problem. You think about what are the different, they call it system leadership thinking, actually. That's system thinking, where you think about issues from a system perspective, all the different parts that are involved and all the different people that are involved. So let me not get too deep into that, but yeah.
I guess the next episode is going to be on leadership and system thinking and so on.
Yeah.
You wanted us to shoot here on this farm, and
Yes.
I guess the Gen Z in me just does not understand why it's so dry, and we're not discarding this entire land. And you told me that this is the what is it? The drought. This is the greatest drought.
Yeah. So this is actually where we're experiencing a drought, one of the worst droughts in the last 20 to 30 years. Not just Botswana, Southern Africa as a whole. Which is why you're seeing the land like this. I just showed you pictures of what this looks like 2 months ago. It's a completely different place. Of course, there's also an issue of this is where deep within winter, we just had a cold front that came through 2 nights ago that actually killed some of my trees here. And the important thing about that is drought actually is not just the farmer's problem. Drought affects the whole economy. So it's going to affect, right now as we speak, there are communities who depend on subsistence farming. There's a village I love visiting close by in Ramatlava. It's called Ramatlabaki. It's actually by the border of the Gauteng district and the Central district, as well as by the border of South Africa and Botswana on the Limpopo River. And the majority of the people that depend on subsistence farming, they literally farm to eat and farm to sell. So when there's a drought, they have nothing. They have nothing to eat, nothing to grow. And they actually just depend on something like Ipelegeng, where they earn about 600 pula a month for a whole family. So the issues that come with that is obviously poverty is elevated, is escalated. And there are many other issues that come along with poverty, as I'm sure you know. So it's not just me as a farmer, okay, there's a drought, my trees have died, some of my animals have died, then, it's a thing. It affects the whole economy. It affects food prices in the end. It affects many other issues. So that's why yeah, and I think the president recently declared that this is a drought year as well. So there's also some subsidies coming from government just to help assist people, and people who are also farmers as well. So
Yeah. Is this the current state of sub-Saharan Africa with the tongue?
I think it's probably, from what I've seen, it's mostly Southern Africa. I don't know above Southern Africa what the situation looks like. But I think Southern Africa, most of us are experiencing this currently.
Mm. And what piqued your interest when you came to farming? Because you speak with such passion. And not to divert completely from the
No,
topic,
it's
but
fine. It's
it's
fine.
getting
It's part
dry.
of it's part of the topic.
Yeah.
I started farming about 8 years ago. Well, I started being a farmer 8 years ago. I actually bought, this is the first piece of land that I bought. And I'll show you the tree that made me buy this land. I was walking around. There was an old lady who owned this farm, and it hasn't been touched in 50 years. Well, now it's about 60 years. By then it was 50 years.
Mm.
And I just had I don't know how to explain it, a spiritual connection with this piece of land. There's a tree, it's a motopi tree. It's about 200 years old. That's on the other side of the farm. But I just walked past it when I was walking with the lady who was showing me the land, the old lady. And I just got goosebumps. So I felt a connection with the land. I felt a connection with that particular tree. And at the time as well, the government also was providing subsidies for fencing. So I was like, okay, if I get this land, I only need to spend 50% to fence this whole X number of hectares of farmland. So in addition to that, I think I would say also my family, just growing up, my father who passed away recently, he used to take me to the farm, and I used to hate it. Like, I didn't
Yeah.
understand, why are we going into the bush? But it was just in me I just love nature. My mother is also, just growing up, we always had a garden. We always had a flower garden in our house, and she's just really good with trees and plants. So I think it's also in my DNA. And I recently found out that my mother's father was one of most esteemed sort of cattle farmers in the village that she grew up in. And it's something I didn't know. So I
In your
think
genes.
there's a generational thing
Yeah.
there going on. But also spiritually, I connect a lot with nature and trees. That's what drove me. And in addition to that, from a policy perspective, it's important to do this. It's important to
Mm.
protect nature.
And you
Um,
as and what I guess this is the positive influence that human beings can have
mhm,
in harnessing
mhm,
nature itself, but there is the impact or negative impact
mm,
that we as human beings are
yeah,
playing
yeah,
in regards to destroying our beautiful nature, affecting climate change.
mhm,
And oftentimes we look at the Western world and we're so eager to blame them
yeah,
and say it's your fault.
yeah,
All these fumes going into the ecosystem and so on, it's their fault, and big corp and so on.
mhm,
But we don't really look at our impact as individuals.
mhm.
Would you like to touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd say there is merit to that argument, right? So the Western world is, for the most part, responsible for where we are today. But the reality is that we still depend on nature. We still depend on
Yeah.
this one earth that we all live in.
Yeah.
So we can point fingers all day, but we need to do something about it.
And what is the something that we speak of?
It's different things.
Yeah, because you spoke about policy, and so now I'm looking at it at a governmental level. But
Mhm.
when you kind of focus it on the everyday civilian, what's our expectation of them as
I
well?
think at a micro level, as a person, it's thinking about your consumption,
Mm.
and your consumption patterns. What are the things you consume? What type of products do you buy? How much electricity do you use? What's your carbon footprint? When you travel, you know, do you fly? Do you drive? Do you bike? Whatever the situation is, and think consciously about that, because it's not just going up in the ether. You're actually impacting the environment,
Yeah.
and you're part of the whole consumption machine that's degrading nature.
Mm.
Um, and that some people also, this is quite philosophical. I've shifted from even eating meat to being vegetarian because it's much more eco-friendly. I wouldn't do that because I like meat, to be
Oh, you're
honest
from
with. Yeah,
Botswana.
yeah, that
Best
one.
beef.
I'm sorry, I can't. Um, yeah, it's being conscious. I think that's
Mm.
what the situation is calling for us. It's being conscious about what you eat, how you eat, and not just eat into your mouth, but what you consume and how you consume, what type of products you buy, where you spend your money. Because that's what we need. We need that sort of shift in consumption patterns and behavior at a micro level. That's what's going to get the businesses that you buy from to think about changing. That's what's
Exactly.
going to, and the investors who are investing in those businesses are also going to invest in businesses that are eco-friendly, that are
Yeah.
thinking about the environment and people and so forth.
Yeah.
So everybody has a part to play, and you need government to provide policy frameworks that allow for this to happen.
Yeah. But is it common? I mean, I know that ESG is the buzzword,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, often with buzzwords, the problem is that it kind of gets deteriorated as with terminology and explanation.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, I was just like, I'm not really sure I know what that means
Mm-hmm.
anymore. What do we mean when we talk sustainability? I don't understand when a room full of older people speaking about sustainability and there's not a single young person in the room. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
So when we speak of ESG, what would you say we're not really getting right? And I speak from, I guess, the Southern African point of view, from a higher level being government and so on,
Mm-hmm.
and organizations to, I guess, your everyday corporate.
ESG is a very, it's a very, just a bit of my background. So the first project I worked on at the World Economic Forum
Mm.
was essentially driving adoption of metrics that companies can use to
Mm.
report on when they talk about ESG. So that in very simple terms means we were trying to provide the language and the metrics and the numbers for companies to use so that when they say I did XYZ in the environment, there's actually a metric that they're all following, that the whole world understands. And we worked with an organization called the IFRS Foundation, which formed this is going to be acronym upon acronym, but formed the ISSB, which then formed ESG standards. So that's the first starting point. It's defining what we mean by ESG.
Mm.
And we talk about measuring the impact on the environment. What are we looking at? It's greenhouse gas emissions, it's energy consumption, and what type of energy you use and that sort of thing. So that's really from more of a thematic and
Yeah.
policy perspective. What I think we probably need, and when you look at indigenous knowledge as well, it doesn't mean that we don't have ESG already. Um,
Yeah.
we have our own practices that are indigenous to where we are from now that are ESG conscious. Like if you think about how some people farm, I have a friend who was telling me that her grandmother used to farm. I can't remember what crop it is, but she would also, every time she would harvest, she would leave some seeds for the next planting season because she didn't want to keep buying seeds every single
Right.
planting season. She wanted to actually sort of have a circularity thing going on. That's an ESG conscious way of thinking. So you don't want to be buying seeds from a corporation that's using so much energy and so forth. You just want to keep reusing the same thing. Same thing with manure. That's, I'm speaking about farming specifically here, but, some people use chicken manure or cow manure to use that as fertilizer. That's circularity. That's ESG thinking. It's indigenous knowledge, right? So there are many things that we do, I think, culturally that are ESG conscious that we don't necessarily term as ESG, but it's important still to have the definition of it from a policy and business perspective so that we all are speaking about the same thing because we're addressing one problem.
And what then is that definition?
Well, from a technical perspective, ESG obviously is environmental, social, and governance. So all of those three have individual sort of categories underneath them. So environment is about what the impact is you're having on the environment. What's your carbon footprint, greenhouse gas emissions, energy consumption, and so forth. From a social perspective, it's what's your impact on the communities you operate in as a business. But also internally, do you have diversity and inclusion policies where you have women in leadership? Where you have people from different sexual orientations as well represented and feeling comfortable and welcome. Where you have people from different religions feeling welcome and being able to participate. And then from a governance perspective is do you have the right governance frameworks within the company to measure your impact on the environment? Also, what's your engagement with governments? Is there any corruption going on? Do you have anti-corruption policies and so forth? So that's what we mean when we talk about ESG for businesses. They have to make those considerations when they operate.
Yeah. My concern has often, silently really, been that ESG policies are often just a checkbox.
Yeah.
And when we talk about it being implemented effectively, it's just for the sake of. And that's been the concern that I've had because oftentimes, especially when I look at certain corporates, I'm like, you just started it, so and you can, it looks like a chat GPT.
Yes, indeed.
You know,
Yeah.
is that something you've noticed, and how can we try curb that?
Yeah, there's a lot of that happening. It's called greenwashing.
Okay.
Um,
It's called greenwashing.
yes, it's a very interesting term. But that's why standards that I was talking about that we help develop as well are important. Because when you have
Mm,
reporting standards, it's the same thing when we talk about ESG reporting standards, it's the same as financial reporting standards.
mm,
With financial reporting, you have to report, your financial statements have to be a certain way. There's already an agreed global framework of what a financial statement looks like.
mm.
So with ESG reporting, we've just introduced that as well, so that companies report on the same thing and using the same metrics. That way you can't, excuse my language, but BS your way around it
Mm.
because you're using numbers that actually talk about,
Yeah.
and we can measure that. And those numbers have to be audited as well, right? So you can't really lie in that sense. But that's why the standards are important. They come
Mm.
in to exactly clean out that greenwashing that's happening.
Yeah. And I think greenwashing also happens because people don't understand the importance.
There's that too. And some people have ulterior motives, right? If I greenwash, then I'm going to get Hithorna to buy my product
And
if
then
she's
that's
not, if she doesn't
right.
understand.
Let's just call
So
it, yeah, yeah, let's
eco-friendly,
say it's a vegan,
yeah, handmade.
you know,
Handmade is always a
things
weird
like
one because I'm
that.
like, whose hands are there working like that?
Exactly.
But yeah.
And so, also on our way here, you said
Hmm.
that there's a lot of industries
Hmm.
that are dependent on the environment. So
Yes.
from mining, tourism and so
Yeah.
on. And I think it just becomes very difficult to understand the gravity of it all,
Hmm.
of our impact, especially as organizations when we
Hmm.
don't actually take it seriously.
Hmm.
So what would you say then to cement the importance? Say you need to understand that when you do XYZ, this is the result, regardless of how small you are or how big you are.
Yeah. Well, the reality is about 60% of Africa's GDP depends on nature.
Yeah.
That's just a fact. So agriculture, tourism, mining, a few other industries as well. They depend on nature. You depend on soil to be in a certain state. You depend on trees and wood for furniture. I mean, there's so many industries that depend on nature. And nature is right now going through so much biodiversity loss,
Mm-hmm.
which means that's going to impact our economies. That's going to impact the food we get on the table and the
Yeah.
food we eat. The medicine that we use depends on nature. We get it from nature as well. So how to get people to realize that is exactly on the numbers and the fact that we depend on this stuff. It's not just for it to look pretty. It actually has a very useful, it has a very important use in our lives.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of movement. I think there's a shift now. Part of a project I'm working on is working with financial institutions across Africa to invest in nature. So to invest in what we call regenerative agriculture that looks at how you harvest. I'm actually going to show you in the farm as well because I'm doing a project. How you harvest rainwater so that it sinks into the soil, so that your soil becomes healthier and it can last, it can go much longer. Instead of because what happens, I'm getting too technical. So with climate change for the Botswana scenario, what we're potentially going to expect is that we're going to have longer droughts
Mm.
and flash floods, more frequent flash floods. Both of those are terrible situations for nature. Flash floods cause soil erosion, so the water drains and it just floods through with minerals on the soil and destroys the soil. So that soil is not going to be productive. You can't really farm with it. That's a problem. And in addition, with the droughts, which you see now, also we're going to have more of this. That's the
Mm.
reality as a result of climate change. So what we're trying to do is, with this initiative that I'm a part of, is to get financial institutions to invest in particular projects that look at how you harvest rainwater so that it sinks into the soil. There's a whole movement called permaculture that I don't want to get into it. But also looking at planting climate resilient trees. I was just telling you that I planted 200 trees
Mm.
in the last 3 months, indigenous trees, because they can resist climate. So no matter what drought comes, the motopi tree, as I was telling you about, is a tree that drought will not do anything to that tree. It's very resistant. You need these type of trees because they actually are good for the soil as well, right?
Mm.
You also need to plant trees that are what they call nitrogen fixing. So they fix nitrogen into the soil. So it's about rehabilitating the soil and getting finance to invest in projects like that.
Right.
Mangroves are also really good for, many other reasons. You also need to look at how you invest in tourism that is also, sustainable.
Mm.
You invest in communities that take care of the environment and so forth. I don't want to get too technical, but that's
I mean,
how
that's
you
the
get
point
it.
of this whole thing, right? This show starts,
Yeah.
this episode starts whenever you want
Right.
it to.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I appreciate how you're talking about, including the finance industry.
Yeah.
They can't set themselves aloof, from this whole thing just
They
because they're
depend
dealing
on
with
this
the
to make money. Yeah.
Exactly.
They're vested, I mean, they have vested interest in making sure this is okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And let's talk about policies. Earlier you alluded to policies, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
very curious about like policies that deals particularly with conservation. Are there any successful ones that you know of or that are in motion now?
I think at a national level, different governments have different policy perspectives and also written policies that they've done. I can't speak of a particular government just because of the position I hold, but from a global perspective, there's what we call the Global Biodiversity Framework, which was adopted by close to 200 countries, not 200 countries, 2 years ago, which is essentially an agreement between governments all over the world to say this is what we're going to do with biodiversity and nature loss. And we're going to reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. And up to 2050, this is what we're going to be doing to make sure that we actually get back on track with biodiversity. So there's an international and global policy that's been set, that has been agreed upon and adopted by governments. The next step is for national governments to translate that to their national context, which is what's happening now in different countries. South Africa actually just launched, or they are launching, a bioeconomy strategy, a national strategy that looks at what they're going to do with this and how they can grow industries out of this. Because there's a lot of money to even make out of this type of work.
Ah.
Yes, of course. Things like biotrade, where you trade, you know, the Moana?
Yeah.
Baobab. Right now it's selling the powder and the seed oil. People use it a lot in Europe as we speak. But you know the brand The Ordinary?
Yeah.
They have
No.
yes, they have not Baobab, they have a Kalahari melon seed, which is melon that grows in the natural world.
Yeah.
It's called Kalahari melon seed oil. And they use that for the skin. It's very good for your skin, for hydration and anti-aging.
I see a
and
lot
so
of people
forth.
going to the farm now. Going, where's that melon? Dry it up and make it a powder.
Yeah, but that's part of work that falls under conservation.
Yeah.
When you now plant Moana trees, which is what I did also in this farm, you know, there's a whole economy that can come out of that and money to make out of that as well. So when you have a national framework that looks at nature, a nature strategy, you can then look at how you grow different industries and create jobs and make money out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've always been a firm believer that all of this, especially when we talk about sustainability and, you know, you speak about 2050 and this agenda, I don't think that this conversation these kind of dialogues would be as effective as if we actually took it to academia and started in primary schools and actually gets young students.
Yeah.
I'm sure I've learned this in social studies, agriculture and so on.
Yeah.
But it was, again, just a checkbox. You learn it just for the sake of. And I'm wondering, do you think that academic institutions could find a way for us to actually look at really just kind of not even just teaching us, but grassroots levels? And, you know, yes, there was that project where, you know, for agriculture, but going beyond that and actually seeing that by virtue of you understanding the importance of you preserving nature and you being at one and understanding that you don't need someone from outside the country to show you the value of what you're growing here, what you have naturally.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's where we're lacking as well, because I don't know how many other biggies we have in Standard 5 right now.
Okay, I don't know about Standard 5, but yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Indeed. 100%. I mean, you have to start there, right? Because first of all, those are the people who are going to be living in this world.
Exactly. We messed it up anyway. So
you know what I mean? But also, I mean, I remember, I was talking to my mother, who's also just a nature fanatic. We were talking about a particular plant. I can't remember what it was. And I was telling her, you know, I came with all this big English, like, oh, you know, this plant, there's this policy, da, 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 da. She's like, you know, that's funny because we've been using this plant. It's Singaparile.
Right.
Actually. That's what the devil's claw, as they call it in
Yeah.
English. So I was telling her, I found out about this devil's claw thing, and it's a plant that grows. Actually, it grows here in this farm. I saw it like 3 months ago during the raining season, and it has just immense benefits for health. Um, and I was telling my mom about it. I was like, they make medication and pills out of this because I think some people use it for, if not diabetes, for some issues. She's like, this plant, we've been using it forever. And she was telling me that when my sisters were born, I have twin sisters who came right
I
before
keep
me.
finding out you think I didn't know you had a brother. I mean, you have a sister and
Yes.
they're twins?
I mean, I'm
Okay,
from a
well,
family.
I mean,
Yes, I
okay,
have
okay.
sisters who are twins. And they were born in the mid 80s. And she was telling me, they were born in City Pico, and she was telling me this Sangaparile, they took it, and a few other women, a number of other women in Pico at the time. And as soon as they took it, I mean, most of them just got pregnant,
Sure.
just like that. And she's telling me your sister's actually, that kind of boosted that as well. So it's things like that where we have this. That's why I talk about the importance of acknowledging our indigenous knowledge. We don't need
Yes.
the biggies to come from the World Economic Forum to come and tell you about this. This knowledge sits everywhere. When you get into this village here, there's a lot of knowledge from people who are here, who understand some of the stuff, who can tell you about some of the uses of some of these plants. And there's commercial, prospects for some of these plants, but we just don't know.
Yeah.
Until some big pharmaceutical company comes and they take all of it and then farm it.
Yeah.
Is what probably would happen. So there's a lot of this. It's called nature capital or natural capital. What you're looking at here is natural capital. This is money. But it's a perception thing. It depends
You
on
could
how
tell
you
my
view things.
resistance. I was like, there's nothing here. Just
Yeah.
leave it alone.
Just saying, well,
Leave
it's
it
dead.
alone.
Just let it go. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate this conversation and the simplicity of it all because again, coming from a point of view where I guess again, I didn't understand that, like you said, it's seasonal. It's like life.
Yeah.
It's dry at first and doesn't seem to work out. And then I should come in October.
Yes, indeed. Indeed.
When we speak about policies, so I don't know if you're privileged to talk about what you guys did at the WEF, that did contribute. Was it just for countries within Europe or something, or did you guys look at African countries as well?
No, so usually the work that WEF does is, has a global perspective, so it involves everyone. There are a number of projects running on nature. There's a number of projects running, on ESG and that sort of thing. Those projects have specific mandates. I wouldn't remember all of them, but even just leaving WEF outside for a minute, even, on the continent, there's a lot of work happening.
Yes.
I think sometimes we take for granted the work that some of the technocrats in our governments do. Even here with the government of Botswana, I've talked to some people who are just doing amazing policy work, right? But it just never probably comes out to the forefront. So there's a lot that's happening.
Yeah.
I think
I had noted down actually a few. I know about the Kavango Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation
right.
Area.
Those are conservation. I mean, Botswana is just advanced when it comes to conservation.
And this is the thing that
we're so advanced.
And I'm so glad you're in Botswana having a conversation about this because something we don't, just from telecommunications to female leadership to...
Right. No, we're very advanced in a number of things. And we have very smart people.
Is it because we don't speak about it enough or because it's so natural to us? Like you're talking about Singapore, it's so common, it's not a big deal.
I don't think it's not necessarily we don't speak about it. I think people do speak about the stuff, right? It's more of what's trending at the moment. This is not trending. I mean, how many people do you know are sitting at a farm randomly in this drought talking about nature? Right. People are having cocktails and having a good time somewhere, right? But I think as time goes and people get more in touch with their roots and people understand the beauty of this, and we have an immense abundance of it. And there's only 2 million, 3 million of us. And you can only imagine, there's just an immense abundance. So many people would kill for this.
Sure.
So I think it's a perception thing, and it's not necessarily that there are people talking about this. There are people doing great stuff already. The government has set out just a fantastic blueprint on nature for years, since the 80s.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's something that is just happening now. When I talk to people on the global stage, they always mention Botswana and the work we've done with conservation for decades,
Yeah.
right? Of course, there's innovation that's coming into play now that we could adopt, like things like nature finance.
What nature finance, what you were talking about earlier.
Exactly.
Okay.
How you get the financial industry involved. Things like biodiversity credits, which is how do you get communities to conserve nature and then pay them to do that. There's also those
Is that
models
a
coming
thing
up.
that's
Yes,
kind of,
yes, it's called biodiversity credits. Community-based biodiversity credits. There's many other things. People use imaging now to sort of map out and see, to take stock of inventory levels when it comes to biodiversity. They use satellite to see, what's the species count for a specific animal that's sort of at risk or that's going extinct, or even a plant species. You can just use a satellite to map that out. There's a lot of innovation happening, and I think maybe that's the next step we could take as a country.
Yeah. And as we speak about this, I don't think we can divorce ourselves from technology as well.
No, absolutely not. Sorry.
It's a given.
Yeah,
so we speak of innovation.
Yeah.
What innovative, new innovative things have come up as a solution for, droughts and so on?
Well, there's a whole movement, particularly on the agriculture space, called climate smart agriculture, which is looking at, there's so many things. I don't even know where to start. There are things that can measure soil health. Yeah, soil health. There are things that can there's actually a drone that can sort of fly up above your farm and be able to tell you potential risks for diseases.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Soil moisture levels. And it can even predict for you when harvest would be, given the soil moisture and given the disease risk. And there's so many things happening.
Yeah.
Now, if you're farming and you don't use tech, you're going to be behind.
True.
Very soon. You're not going to be as productive as guys who are using tech.
Yeah.
And you're going to be out of business.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a lot of young people that do watch this podcast, and I wonder, what would you then say to us in understanding it? Does it first start with us going to the farm? Does it start with us actually understanding what's going on? So that things are not necessarily happening to us, but we're fully engaged, that we engage in ESG based summits or conversations, dialogue, and we don't divorce ourselves from what's happening and say, well, it's the elders will do it, we'll deal with it.
They're not dealing with it. Let's start there. Look, farming is cool. I know that sounds bizarre and ridiculous. Because I think when people think about farming, they just think maraka and homu and, it's not. Farming is just, there's so many. I don't even have cows on this land. I don't have animals. I'm all for trees and plants. I do agroforestry. So you need to find what that thing is for you. Some people love both trees and animals. But in addition to that, it's about being conscious. You need to be able to listen to nature. What you're seeing here is not just dead trees. There's a lot of intelligence that's happening that you're not necessarily seeing if you're not paying attention. There's a reason why a particular tree grows a certain way. It's responding to light. It's responding to the moisture levels and the slope and so many other things. So if you're a person that pays attention, there's a lot you can learn in nature, actually. And there's a lot of ideas. A lot of my ideas, 80% of them that were successful, came from me just walking in the bush by myself.
I saw a study, it was an American study, but I think it also impacts or has some sort of influence on us. It says that the younger generation is getting older quicker and it's less accomplished. And we're not accomplishing as much as people before us were accomplishing. And I think as you speak on this, I'm so fascinated by how you mentioned spiritual elements of just being in nature and how you can learn a lot. The day you talked about the shepherd's tree and how its roots go about 70 meters, finding water, and that speaks a lot about the resilience.
Exactly.
Yeah. Is that what you also kind of experience as well?
100%. I was talking to a friend the other day.
Is that my sister? Is that my friend? I get it.
Sister and I fight a lot. We don't really talk. It's usually just bickering. But I was talking to a friend who is Christian and has known me to be Christian. I mean, if I was to choose a religion, I'd say, if I was to describe my religion, I'd say I identify mostly with Christianity, but not all the way. And they were asking me about going to church. I don't really go to church anymore, but I believe in Jesus, right? And I tell them my church is just being in nature. This is where I literally hear God. So there's a whole spiritual, and that's the thing with nature. it doesn't, even if you are Muslim, you can come into nature and you'll still hear Allah,
Mm.
you know? Whatever religion you come from, nature doesn't have those boundaries that we have, you know? So there's a lot of learnings you can get here, and there's a lot of connection you can have with a higher power, a spiritual power that you may or may not believe in. Even if you don't believe in a spiritual power, just being able to admire the nature that's growing naturally without any human interference. That's a powerful thing, right? It just shows you that there's intelligence happening outside of you. The world is not just in your mind and the anxiety you have, right?
Right.
There's so much happening that you can't see, but you need to be able to pay attention, and that's a spiritual practice in itself.
Yeah. Because we live in
So,
a very pharmaceutical age where we see.
and tech and screens and whatever,
Yeah.
and how's
Yeah.
that treating us?
Yeah. I love how you also have such a deep innate knowledge of what's happening in and around Botswana. And I think you're working for such a reputable organization. That type of representation means so much to a lot of us. And have you found yourself often kind of patting yourself on the back and going, yeah, no, that's it. That's my country.
Yes, I think I would say every time I'd be at these platforms and you tell people you're from Botswana, there's always a positive reception.
Yeah.
I think we've built a great brand, and a great
Did you
country.
see the videographer go, turn off? Like, this better not appear.
It may not feel that way when
It doesn't
when you're
here.
inside.
Yeah.
And I can see why, because even for the past few weeks, there's things that were frustrated me, and I'm like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But when you go outside and you tell people you're from Botswana, they're just wowed. Like, wow, man, how did you guys, especially the other Africans, they're like, how did y'all not have a civil war? And like,
What was happening around
yeah,
you?
they think it's weird. They think it's actually very
Right.
weird. But then, so then there was a phase where I was like, who do these people don't understand the reality of, yes, I was like, this would have it. Listen. But then, as I got into the policy space and I read some of the policy work that we've written,
Oh, wow.
that not we, I mean, people Botswana have written,
Yeah.
work that's been done, not even just in government, even the private sector. When you meet people, and talk to people in the work they're doing, even as I said, the indigenous knowledge you have, the
Yeah.
people in the villages that you just look down upon and think they don't know anything. They know so much, but there's just no language to translate it to make it seem like it's intelligence, but it is intelligence, right? So when you go, and the peace that we just naturally have as a country, like, it's just, it's a very special thing. It really is a special thing.
Yeah.
I would say. I'm a very proud Motswana.
I
I do have my frustrations, but I'm very
As
proud.
anyone would with their respective countries.
Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate this. And now it just really just flies by, I will be honest.
Yeah.
It really does.
Indeed.
And I appreciate you not being as technical as I thought you would be.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the moment you're
my
like,
best.
terminate. Pause. Because essentially, the problem is that when you speak about things like what's the difference between equity and equality,
Right.
people give you the same definitions when they're
Yeah.
completely different.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so I think it's the same thing with ESG and biodiversity. I'm glad that you're able to simplify it and show how practical it is.
Yeah.
For us to understand and the roles we're playing actively every day without realizing.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that as well. And do you have any parting words? Because you're really brilliant. And you know how I know this. I subscribe to, so do you know Animal Farm, the book?
Yes.
By George Orwell. Okay, cool. So George Orwell, hold on, I have a whole thing.
Okay, let's go. Let's do it.
The whole thing is that, his whole spiel is that if you're able to break down really complicated issues or topics, that's a measure of your intelligence. So it's not necessarily about being able to say, oh my goodness, the global landscape and so on, and sounding good, but it's in actually being able to simplify it for everyone to understand and actually engage people in this dialogue so that it can be an ongoing conversation. And so that's where my admiration of your brilliance comes from.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. That's very kind. Yeah, I think it's quite useless to understand stuff at the technical policy level, not really translated to everyday life. What's the point of that? Then write a textbook and go home. You know, so I think it's about, I like real things.
Right.
I like real tangible things. That's how I learn. I want to see it and feel it. But back to your parting words, I want us to talk about energy, but we'll talk about that on a different
Yeah, I
topic
just
because I
realized
think
that.
energy is a very important topic. But the parting words, I would say, given we were talking about nature and
Yeah,
biodiversity and so forth, I just would implore people to just go and spend time out in nature.
yeah.
Um, just walk out and just go into the bush and appreciate what we have. Um, listen and just watch. There's so much going on. Listen not with the eyes that you're just walking around and just seeing, okay, a green tree. No, look at it and analyze it and try and understand. And just listen. Listen to the
Mm,
birds chirping and the sound they're making, and look at the birds that are flying around and which trees they go to and how they just observe life. There's a lot to unpack from there. There's a lot of reflections you can have as a person.
mm,
You will become a better person just literally by starting there.
yeah.
In addition to that, I think people should go into farming. And I know I say that from a privileged place because I have land and not everyone has land, but whatever, even if it's in your backyard and you're just growing a few plants, just for fun,
Mm,
do that. The process of seeing, a life species evolve from seed to fruit, is it's spiritual as well.
mm.
So my whole point is just pay attention, get involved in nature, and your life would be a much higher quality life
Yeah.
that way.
Do you want to touch a bit on the energy aspect? Because you did mention
Oh,
that
it's
you're
gonna get
into.
too technical. We
Is
can,
it?
yeah,
But I'm curious though. Again, it is my show.
it is your
I can
show.
do whatever I
It is
want.
your show.
Do you want to touch maybe on the global, not really global, but just, I guess, since we've been speaking from a sub-Saharan or Southern African
Yeah, okay. I'll just be very
perspective
quick on it
on
because the global will
energy,
take us forever.
energy landscape?
So
Yeah.
I'm also very heavily involved in the energy space.
Mm.
Um, Energy is very political, and
Mm.
energy is not just electricity.
Oh yeah.
Electricity is part of it. Uh, there's a whole movement now from different governments and companies to transition from using fossil fuels to renewable energy because of climate change and so forth. The story though is that for Africa, the story is a bit different because not only do we obviously need to transition from using fossil fuels the whole time to partly renewables, we also need energy access. Our
Mm.
biggest priority is to make sure more people can actually access electricity, which is going to boost our economies.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. But then how do you do that? Um, I think I always say it's best to do that while also getting people access to electricity, but from renewable
Right.
sources. Because then that's you're killing two birds with one stone. You're getting people energy access, but also you're using energy that's clean, which is good for the environment, and it's actually renewable, so it can go forever,
Mm.
right? There's a piece to that as well as that the renewable energy movement, the energy transition movement is going to require what they call critical minerals. You're going to need lithium, you're going to need manganese, you're going to need copper, nickel, so forth, which we have a lot of. I'm not necessarily we as Botswana, but the
No, yeah,
continent has a
Africa.
lot of.
Yeah.
So it's about thinking about policies around that as well. How are these going to be mined by who? And looking at the value chains. Are we just going to mine the raw materials and ship them out like we've been doing for decades? Or is the thinking going to
Mm.
be different? And how do you get citizens to participate in that? How do you educate people? So energy is a very technical and long process, which
Mm.
is why it's political.
Right.
Because there are different people who have different political views on it.
And agendas and
And agendas,
intentions.
for
Yeah.
sure. So,
Sure. So this will motivate you to come back to talk about it again. Have you been learned?
so
Very
yeah, so
interesting.
that's the bit I can say. And I think from a personal level, um, again, going micro about energy, it's thinking about the energy sources that you use, right? That's how you think about the impact on the environment. Unfortunately for us as a country, most of our energy comes from coal
Yes.
and non-renewable sources. I think diesel as well. So in a way, it's difficult to then say, okay, I want to use renewable energy because the power light you put on at your house is coming from coal.
Oh yeah.
But you can think about there's another element of energy called energy efficiency, which is looking at how you use appliances that use less energy but still produce the same amount of output.
Right.
That's why when you have LED lights, they use less energy, but they give you the same amount of light. So it's about using appliances that are energy conscious.
Right.
Especially for Botswana, it's air conditioners. It's so hot. Everyone has an air conditioner. So you need to make sure you buy air conditioners that are energy efficient.
Yeah.
Because in the long run, they're going to save you electricity bills, money.
Mm.
So there's also that. At the micro level, it's thinking more on the efficiency and how you use energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need
That's it.
more of you out here.
What? I'm not sure about
We
that.
sure do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is great.
It has.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing me out of my element. Honestly,
Yeah,
kicking and fighting.
you really were kicking and
Kicking and
fighting.
fighting, but I
Yeah.
appreciate it. And I appreciate you for joining and looking forward to seeing your comments. Please do subscribe and see you next time.